This story comes from the subreddit entitled People, shared by the user Dad Who Stood His Ground. The reason my wife despises her family is simple: they're mostly just awful people. She has a younger half-sister from her mother's second marriage, a sister raised in an environment of indulgence and favoritism. My wife's stepfather was not only emotionally but also physically abusive. He disappeared after a decade, leaving behind a fractured family. Since my wife had a different father, she also had different grandparents. Her dad, a genuinely good man, divorced her toxic mother early in their marriage. That separation left a 7-year age gap between my wife and her half-sister, and from the moment that girl was born, my wife became invisible. Neglected and pushed aside, my wife eventually chose to live full-time with her father in her teens. Her mother, furious at losing child support, made a spectacle of it. She was equally hostile to me when I entered the picture, making it clear she thought my wife could do better, simply because I wasn't rich. Never mind that I own a home, have a stable income, and, most importantly, love my wife unconditionally. As for my sister-in-law, she was the ultimate spoiled child, never disciplined, never held accountable, and constantly getting into trouble. Imagine a real-life Veruca Salt, minus the billionaire dad. And when she met me, things got complicated. The seduction attempt. When my sister-in-law turned 18, she started visiting more often and even asked to stay over on weekends. My wife, ever hopeful for a sisterly bond, agreed. But I quickly noticed a shift. She lingered around me more, wore increasingly revealing outfits, and showered me with over-the-top compliments. She'd pinch my arms, giggle, and tell me I was built like a candle with muscles, whatever that meant. Then one day she crossed the line. While my wife was out of the room, she reached for my crotch. That was it. I told her to leave immediately. She smirked and purred, "You don't know what you're missing." Before I could even react further, my wife stormed in and erupted. The confrontation was explosive, with my wife tearing into her sister while she fired back, insisting my wife didn't deserve a man like me. Then she stormed out. The relentless pursuit. Most people would take rejection and move on. Not my sister-in-law. She escalated. 4 years at every family event, she ramped up her advances, sometimes with backup. The worst was a family Halloween party, where she and her cousin cornered me while dressed in skimpy animal cosplay. They outright proposed a threesome. I shut them down instantly. My wife, always my first call, confronted them in front of the whole family. But instead of shame, we faced outrage. Mother-in-law jumped to her golden child's defense, calling me a liar and rallying relatives against us. Rather than cause more drama, we just walked out. The jewelry box heist. By the time my sister-in-law turned 21, we were already distancing ourselves. The final nail in the coffin came 2 years ago when my wife's grandmother passed away. The inheritance was clear. My wife received a collection of antique jewelry passed down through generations. When appraised, its value was staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. The jewelry was kept locked in an exquisite hand-carved jewelry box, itself a priceless heirloom. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law were furious. At the will reading, they fumed over getting nothing, but the real outrage came when they discovered my wife was the sole inheritor of the jewelry. Mother-in-law even threatened legal action but never followed through. Instead, she played the long game, acting nice. My wife, ever the optimist, decided to give them one last chance and allowed them into our home. That was our mistake. Because the moment our backs were turned, they tried to steal it all. While I was out picking up dinner and my wife was distracted, sister-in-law made her move. She pretended to go to the bathroom but instead raided my wife's vanity, making a beeline for the jewelry box. But she never made it out undetected. By sheer luck, I arrived just in time. Fate was on our side that night. I wasn't gone as long as they'd hoped. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights swept across a figure, my sister-in-law, clutching the antique jewelry box. The moment the light hit her, panic set in. She dropped the box onto the pavement with a sickening crack before scrambling into mother-in-law's car, locking herself inside. My curses filled the night air, drawing both my wife and mother-in-law outside. My wife gasped in horror as she saw the shattered remains of the jewelry box, priceless heirlooms spilling onto the concrete. Mother-in-law, realizing their scheme had failed, exploded. She ranted about how my wife didn't deserve the jewelry, how it should have gone to her precious golden child. When I stepped between them, mother-in-law lashed out, clawing at me with her nails. I felt the sting as she raked my skin, drawing blood. But the moment my wife announced she was calling the police, mother-in-law and sister-in-law sped off into the night. We left the crime scene untouched and made the call. The police arrested them both. But justice was disappointing. They walked away with nothing but a fine and community service, barely a consequence for what they had done. Meanwhile, the jewelry box, a family treasure, was left in ruins. A long crack split its once perfect surface, and one of the brass hinges snapped clean off. I wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. I went straight to mother-in-law and demanded she and her daughter pay for the restoration. At first, she scoffed, until I reminded her that we had police reports, documented evidence, and proof of her assault on me. If she didn't pay, I'd have no problem dragging them both to court. The smugness vanished. She wrote me a check on the spot, glaring as she handed it over. I warned her that if the check bounced or she placed a stop payment on it, court would be inevitable. It cleared without issue. The restoration cost hundreds, but the jewelry box came back looking better than ever. Still, we knew we couldn't keep the jewelry at home anymore. The risk was too high. We secured it in a safety deposit box where it remains to this day. That night we made another decision. Our home needed cameras. And we've had them ever since. The baby name war. While all this chaos unfolded, my wife and I were fighting a different battle. One we never expected. For 4 years we struggled to conceive, racing against the dreaded wrong side of 35. By some miracle it finally happened. At 33 we were blessed with a beautiful baby boy. We were ecstatic. After finding out we were having a son, we started searching for the perfect name. Eventually, I suggested my Scottish grandfather's name, and my wife fell in love with it instantly. That was it. That was our baby's name. But we made one fatal mistake. We announced it on social media. And just like clockwork, sister-in-law slithered in to ruin it. Unbeknownst to us, she was also pregnant, further along than my wife. And not only was she expecting a boy, she decided she wanted my grandfather's name. Not just the first name. The middle name too. When we confronted her, furious at the blatant theft, she smugly told us, "There's nothing you can do about it." And she was right. Legally, there was nothing stopping her. But this was far from over. Standing our ground. It didn't take long for us to realize that my sister-in-law thrived on drama. She thought she could manipulate us into changing our baby's name by taking it first, but we refused to play her game. I laughed and told her that while what she did was underhanded and petty, it wouldn't change our decision. She could name her baby whatever she wanted. It wouldn't stop us from using the name we had chosen for our son. That's when her baby daddy called. He accused me of being unreasonable for keeping the name after his girlfriend claimed it. I shut that down immediately. She claimed nothing. If we couldn't own the name, neither could they. He hung up on me, but not before threatening that I'd be sorry if we didn't change it. Spoiler alert, we didn't change it. Months later, my sister-in-law gave birth to a healthy baby boy and named him after my grandfather. We didn't visit, not because of the pandemic, but because we simply didn't care. That didn't sit well with her. She called, fishing for congratulations, but instead she got the hard truth. We still weren't changing our baby's name. She tried demanding to speak to my wife, but the call was already on speaker. My wife made it crystal clear. We weren't budging. Then came the emails. Sister-in-law bombarded us with wall after wall of suggested baby names, desperately trying to get us to change ours. I responded once saying, "This name is from my grandfather. That's why we're not changing it." That shut her up, at least for a while. The final blow. 2 months later, we were blessed with our son. He was perfect, and we proudly gave him the name we had always intended. Days after the birth, my phone rang. Sister-in-law was screaming at us, claiming we had copied her son's name. I calmly pointed out that she was actually the copycat. She had no connection to the name, no family ties, no sentimental value. She stole it purely out of spite. And anyone who looked at our family tree would see the truth. Then my wife delivered the final blow. She told sister-in-law that after the attempted theft of her grandmother's jewelry, she no longer considered her family. And just as sister-in-law had chosen to be petty, my wife chose to cut her out of our lives completely. Sister-in-law hung up sobbing. That should have been the end of it. But for months, we were bombarded with messages from my wife's side of the family. Some were on our side, but others weren't. Her baby daddy, true to his word, even showed up at my house. I'm 6 feet 1 inch, well-built, and regularly hit the gym. He was 5 feet 6 inches, scrawny, and had a baby face barely hidden by a wispy beard. I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but I shut it down fast. I told him, "My house has cameras. Get off my property and never come back." He threw some weak insults at me before storming off in his beat-up old car. Then, of course, sister-in-law and mother-in-law called from a different number to yell at me for making him feel emasculated. They tried one last time to pressure us into changing our baby's name. I laughed. I told them that sister-in-law didn't even name her child out of love, she did it out of spite. And if they still thought they were in the right, they were delusional. That was the last straw for my wife. She called them out for the years of entitlement and favoritism, for always treating her like she was less than her sister. And she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with them ever again. That left sister-in-law sobbing again, while mother-in-law called me a royal bastard before hanging up. The ultimate defeat. Weeks later we got a final call from sister-in-law. Through gritted teeth she bitterly admitted, "You won." Her baby daddy left. He was furious that she never let him have any say in their son's name. He wanted the child to have his name, not the name of some random man he wasn't even related to. The fights got worse and eventually she caved. They legally changed the boy's name. It cost her hundreds of dollars and she had to adjust to calling him by a completely new name. And then, as if she hadn't embarrassed herself enough, she had the audacity to demand we pay her back for the name change plus another $100 for emotional distress. We laughed. None of this would have happened if she hadn't stolen our baby name out of sheer pettiness. She created this mess. We owed her nothing. Since then we've been completely no contact with her mother-in-law and their toxic side of the family. The only exception is my father-in-law, a genuinely good man, who adores his grandson and visits often. The aftermath, not our circus, not our monkeys. Of course the drama didn't die overnight. Some of my wife's relatives continued to harass us. Her cousin in particular, took it upon herself to personally demand we compensate sister-in-law. We refused. She screamed that we ruined sister-in-law's relationship and that now her child's name would forever be a reminder of what we had done. I simply told her, we didn't start this. We just refused to be a part of it. She flipped me off with both hands and even said she wished she could do it with her toes. Before she got in her car, I warned her that if she ever showed up again I'd file for a restraining order. We haven't heard from them since. A lesson in boundaries and pettiness. This entire saga started with something so small, a baby name. But in the end it exposed everything wrong with that side of the family. Their entitlement. Their obsession with control. Their inability to see beyond their own selfishness. Some people live for drama. They will burn their own lives to the ground just to make others miserable. The best thing you can do? Stand your ground and walk away. For anyone reading this, have you ever dealt with a toxic family situation like this? A time when someone tried to manipulate you but you refused to cave? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tale of pettiness, betrayal, and ultimate karma, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching and until next time, stay drama-free.